Joining me now, Sky News contributor Chris Yorman. Chris, interestingly today, Victorian Energy Minister Lily D'Ambrosio forced to admit the full cost of the government's renewable energy plan is unknown. She doesn't know what it is, but she's rejected anyone saying it's as much as $20 billion rather than the $4.3 billion she's budgeted for. This came out of a budget hearing on Friday, where she said the lights would go out if these new transmission lines weren't built, but that she could not reveal the full cost and she could not reveal the impact on bills until the contracts had been signed. Now, I don't know how anyone could sign a contract without the cost being known, but put that to one side. If we keep up this push on renewables, the lights will go out anyway, transmission lines or not.
Well, we've seen it around the world, Peter. Everywhere you put in large-scale deployment of wind and solar, two things happen. The grid becomes more fragile and electricity prices soar. And I see Lily D'Ambrosio saying that it's not going to be $20 billion, but can't say how much it's going to be. And of course, those transmission lines that she's left out of the equation probably come to around about $16 billion. So what do we know about that? We know that 9% of your electricity bill is the transmission costs. Once those are decided and set in stone by the regulator, then they get a regulated rate of return. That's 9% of your electricity bill. They can only go up. That is the only direction in which they are heading. And it's interesting now that the federal Labor Party has stopped saying that people's electricity bills will go down. But the great lie in all of this has to be exposed, and that is it will be neither greener nor cheaper, and the system will certainly be more fragile. That's the energy future, which is on offer because of the policy decisions of state and federal governments.
And all the while, Chris, state and federal, there's a whole lot of Mickey Mouse accounting. The Victorian Treasurer has revealed the government will save, this is, as I say, Mickey Mouse accounting, $3.3 billion because they're going to use AI and automation to free up the time of public servants, get them off the repetitive sort of tasks. Now, forget all the other things in a modern economy that we need good and reliable energy for, but it feels like no one in Parliament anywhere, state or federal, really understands this worldwide race on AI. It's underway, and unless we have here in this country huge new sources of energy, we're not even at the starting line.
Yeah, well, in fact, the Australian Energy Market Energy Operator and the regulator have started to raise questions about artificial intelligence and what that might do to Australia's grid, because we really don't have an excess of power because of the kind of system we're building. So let's try to put some of these things in perspective, Peter. What kind of energy demand might an artificial intelligence data centre bring? Well, 1 gigawatt is a term that's been bandied around in the United States. That's for a big one. So imagine a city the size of Melbourne. Well, Adelaide. That is round about 1/3 of the demand of a city the size of Adelaide. It's bigger than the peak demand of a city the size of Canberra. And you will need to build dozens of these things if you want to be in the race. We're going to see a surge in the demand for electricity. And what kind of electricity? Well, it has to be dispatchable because these things will demand that level of energy 24/7. That will not be running on wind and solar. So in the United States, what's happening? They are building these data centres right alongside the gas fields in the Permian Basin, and they'll export the data from there. So what is Australia's plan for doing anything like that? And as usual, we apparently don't have a plan.
No, we're going to make budget savings, though, from AI capacity we can't even turn on, but we'll leave that for a moment. You had a great column, a terrific column on the weekend in the Oz, and you pointed out how young people and climate change activists are living some sort of lie. You're spot on. I guess the problem is, Chris, if you look at the recent election, most of them are drifting away from the two big parties of government. How do we get young people to understand that almost everything in the world that helps them pay their way, that gives them the magnificent standard of living we have in Australia, comes from a budget that's underpinned by fossil fuels?
Yeah, and look, it is a really big question because Australians now who live mostly in cities are completely disconnected to where their energy comes from. They think they flick on a switch and that's where it comes from. Of course, it's got to be sourced from somewhere. Electricity is just a transport mechanism. The fuel source, mostly on the east coast of Australia, is coal, and we are getting rid of that at the moment. But beyond that, whenever we talk about electricity, we're only talking about 18% of this energy transition problem, because the other 80% is involved in transport, in agriculture, in making bricks, in making steel, in making cement, in making plastic. There's literally nothing that you can see in the built environment around you that does not have some of that actually embedded in its industrial production. Even the food that you eat, if they've used synthetic fertiliser, comes from fossil fuel. It comes from natural gas, getting the nitrogen out of the atmosphere to make that fertiliser. Look, the way I describe it to people is that my grandfather was born in 1899 in Brisbane into a house that had no electricity and no running water and no indoor toilet. There were no cars on the streets. There were no planes in the sky. When he died in 1967, we were 2 years away from the moonshot. That's the greatest leap forward in human history. And what drove it? Fossil fuel.